We often romanticize pirates as simple outlaws, but they were, in fact, masterful innovators in governance, finance, and social contract. Tonight, we dismantle that myth and embark on a journey across 3 centuries, from the Caribbean's pirate republics to the digital frontier of the dark web. We will explore how their self-made rules, currencies, and spoils distribution created parallel economies, and discover profound, unsettling ways that resemble modern cryptocurrencies, offshore havens, and shadow markets. Prepare to see the Jolly Roger in the blockchain. The golden age of piracy, spanning roughly from 1650 to 1730, was not just an era of swashbuckling adventure and maritime terror. It was, perhaps more importantly, a sprawling, decentralized experiment in alternative governance and radical self-organization. When we imagine the pirate, we conjure up a lawless brute guided only by greed and violence, sailing under the notorious Jolly Roger. This popular image is a profound oversimplification. In reality, the most successful and enduring pirate communities, from the buccaneers of Tortuga and Port Royal to the concentrated anarchy of Nassau, operated under sophisticated, self-imposed codes that ran directly counter to the rigid, hierarchical, and often brutal legal systems of the European powers they preyed upon. They had, in effect, forged invisible republics on the high seas, complete with written constitutions, economic systems, and a form of social security that was centuries ahead of the nations they abandoned. To truly understand this comparison, we must first dive deep into the pirates' foundational document, the Articles of Agreement, or the Chast Party. This wasn't some loosely agreed-upon handshake. It was a signed, legalistic contract that every crew member, from the lowliest cabin boy to the captain, had to swear an oath to uphold. These articles represented a clean break from the king's rules and the draconian discipline of the Royal Navy or Merchant Service, where a common sailor had virtually no rights, suffered under cruel pay, and was subject to flogging or execution at the whim of an aristocratic officer. The pirate articles, in contrast, were startlingly democratic. The captain, while certainly the leader in battle, was not an absolute monarch. He was elected by the crew and could be, and often was, voted out by a majority if he was deemed cowardly, tyrannical, or incompetent. This mechanism of checks and balances ensured a degree of accountability that was non-existent in the legitimate maritime world. The power of the captain was explicitly limited by the power of the quartermaster. This individual, also elected, was a true arbiter of internal affairs. He resolved disputes, supervised the distribution provisions, and, crucially, protected the crew from an overreaching captain. On a pirate ship, the quartermaster's word, not the captain's, was final regarding punishment and the division of spoils, an ingenious structural protection against dictatorship. This structure underpinned the pirates' unique system of wealth distribution, which is a first and most direct parallel to modern alternative economies. The system was defined by a fixed, pre-agreed-upon formula for the division of all plunder, making it radically transparent and merit-based. No other system of the time offered such clarity. The formula wasn't a secret negotiation. It was codified in the articles. A typical division would grant the captain 1.5 or 2 shares, the quartermaster and other key officers, the boatswain, the gunner, perhaps 1.25 or 1.5 shares, and every common sailor, cook, or musician received 1 full share. This flat, egalitarian share structure for the majority of the crew fostered unparalleled loyalty and fighting spirit. Everyone knew, down to the penny, exactly what they were fighting for, a far cry from the minuscule and unpredictable wages of a naval sailor. But perhaps the most striking aspect of the pirate social contract was the wounds and injury schedule. This was, quite literally, a written social insurance program, a compensation table for workplace injuries. Losing a right arm? 10% of the total haul, or 600 pieces of 8. Losing a leg? A bit less, maybe 400. An eye or a finger? A defined guaranteed payment. This system guaranteed that the most dangerous members of the society, those who suffered crippling injury in battle, would not be left destitute, begging in a port. It was a contractual pre-funded disability insurance model, funded by the collective wealth of the community, an innovation that would not be replicated in most Western nations for another 2 centuries. The implicit covenant was clear: risk your life for community, and the community will care for you if you are broken. This level of social and economic organization transformed a loose collection of mutineers and escaped slaves into a cohesive, highly motivated, and at times, terrifyingly effective fighting force. This collective wealth management, self-imposed regulation, and transparent pay structure are the ghosts that haunt our modern discussions of decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, transparent ledgers, and alternative financial systems. If the pirate ship was a decentralized autonomous organization of the 17th and 18th centuries, then the modern shadow economy, the dark net markets, the complex web of offshore banking, and the entire apparatus of financial secrecy represents its contemporary, digital, and vastly more sophisticated successor. The underlying function of both systems is identical: to create and sustain an economic zone that operates outside the regulation, taxation, and legal oversight of established nation-states. The critical nexus between these two eras is the concept of trustless transaction and bespoke law. In the Golden Age, a captured Spanish coin, the silver piece of 8, the Spanish dollar, served as the ultimate global reserve currency. It was fungible, widely accepted, and easily verified by its weight and stamp. It required no trust in the issuer's central bank, only in the silver content itself. This made it the perfect pirate currency. It was the ultimate bearer asset, untraceable once melted or spent, and universally valued across the Atlantic. Compare this to the role of cryptocurrencies in the modern shadow economy. Cryptocurrencies, particularly those favored on darknet markets, DNMs, like Bitcoin and Monero, act as the 21st century pieces of 8. They are the essential medium of exchange because they enable pseudonymous, non-custodial transfer of value across borders without reliance on the legacy banking infrastructure, the very infrastructure governed by the nation-states the markets are seeking to avoid. Bitcoin's decentralized ledger or blockchain is the modern equivalent of the pirate article's transparency, albeit applied to transactions rather than profit sharing. It publicly verifies the transaction without revealing the identity of the participants, creating a trustless ledger where the technology, not the sovereign, enforces the integrity of the record. Furthermore, the operational structure of a darknet market echoes the Articles of Agreement in striking ways. Modern DNMs require vendors and buyers to agree to a complex, digitally enforced contract of service. Just as the quartermaster oversaw disputes on a pirate vessel, DNMs employ sophisticated escrow systems and dispute resolution mechanisms. The buyer pays a cryptocurrency into a multi-signature wallet held by the market administrator, the modern quartermaster. The funds are only released to the vendor upon confirmation of delivery. If a product is not delivered or is fraudulent, the dispute is arbitrated by a neutral moderator, often based on a system of vendor reputation and verifiable communication logs. This is a complete, self-governing legal framework for commerce, created entirely ex nihilo and enforced not by police or courts, but by technology and the threat of permanent exclusion from the market, which is the economic equivalent of being marooned. The sheer volume and value of the modern shadow market necessitate the use of offshore jurisdictions, the financial equivalent of the pirate haven of Tortuga. Offshore centers like the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands BVI, and Switzerland do not literally deal in ill-gotten loot, but they provide the essential infrastructure of secrecy and limited disclosure that allows wealth to be shielded from national tax authorities and regulatory bodies. A key tool in this system is the establishment of a shell corporation or an offshore trust. A shell corporation is a legal entity that exists primarily on paper, in a jurisdiction with lax disclosure rules. It functions as an economic mask, obscuring the ultimate beneficial owner of assets and income. This is directly comparable to the pirate practice of operating under an assumed name or a foreign flag to evade capture. The goal is the same: to create a legal or physical distance between the asset and the individual, making the wealth difficult to trace and seize. While pirates use the remote coves of the Caribbean to clean and fence their physical goods, modern wealth uses a sophisticated legal engineering of the offshore financial system to sanitize and integrate illicit or simply untaxed funds into legitimate global financial network. This process, often called money laundering, is the modern equivalent of fencing or cleaning the pirate loot, giving it a veneer of legitimate origin. In both contexts, the community, pirate crew or market participants, and the state-level actors, havens or offshore centers, agreed to a common set of self-governing rules and financial instruments that prioritized sovereignty over secrecy for its participants. The pirate economy was driven by the desire to escape the state's monopoly on power and wealth. The modern shadow economy is driven by the desire to escape the state's monopoly on taxation and regulation. The motivation remains freedom from sovereign constraint, but the methods have evolved from cutlasses and cannons to code and corporate structures. The core difference between a state-sanctioned economy and a shadow economy, be it 18th century piracy or 21st century FI, is a locus of authority, the power shift from the sovereign to the social contract, or in the modern case, the code itself. We established the critical role of the quartermaster as the elected guarantor of the pirate's social contract. His power was not derived from a king, but from the explicit, written consensus of the crew. He was the chief executive of internal fairness, ensuring that articles were upheld, managing supplies, and leading the democratic process of punishing infractions. He was the embodiment of codified self-rule. This concept of a self-enforcing, transparent, and consensus-driven legal system finds its ultimate expression today in the mechanisms of decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, and smart contracts on the blockchain. A DAO is essentially a digital pirate ship. It is an organization that is governed by rules encoded as computer programs, smart contracts that exist transparently on a blockchain. Just as a pirate crew voted on the articles and the distribution of loot, DAO members vote on proposals for the organization's treasury and future direction using governance tokens. The key difference is that the rules are enforced not by the physical presence of a quartermaster with a cutlass, but by the immutable logic of the code. A smart contract acts as the modern, automated articles of agreement. It is a self-executing contract where the terms of the agreement between buyer and seller, or borrower and lender, or contributor and DAO are directly written into lines of code. The code controls the execution, and transactions are traceable and irreversible. This fundamentally eliminates the need for a trusted third party, a bank, a lawyer, or a state court. The phrase, "code is law," is a contemporary iteration of the pirates' absolute reliance on the chasse party. Both systems are designed to bypass the state and its slow, expensive, and often biased legal machinery. The smart contract, like the pirate articles, offers a faster, cheaper, and universally available parallel justice system where the law is enforced by mathematics and technology, not by decree. Furthermore, consider the specialized governance of the offshore jurisdictions. While not strictly shadow markets, they provide the essential legal infrastructure for wealth mobility and opacity. These jurisdictions have crafted their own highly bespoke legal systems, particularly in the areas of trust, corporate law, and asset protection. They essentially offer a menu of customized legal regimes that wealthy individuals and corporations can shop for, just as a pirate haven provided a legal environment or lack thereof, where loot could be traded and debt settled outside of London's jurisdiction. The BVI or the Cayman Islands offer a corporate law regime that prioritizes non-disclosure and asset isolation over the public interest disclosure required in, say, New York or Berlin. The comparison holds. The pirate captain and quartermaster created their own ad hoc law when the existing law failed to serve their needs or interests. Modern participants in shadow economies, crypto markets, and offshore finance likewise seek out self-governing or highly specialized legal and technical systems to meet the same need: economic autonomy outside the established, centralized sovereign power. Whether enforced by an elected officer, a line of code, or a specialized trust law, the result is the formation of a self-contained, parallel governance structure that validates its own rules, its own currencies, and its own methods of distribution, creating an independent economic layer distinct from a mainstream. The choice of currency is never purely economic. It is a declaration of sovereignty and an indicator of who the participants truly trust. For the pirate, the preferred medium of exchange was the piece of 8, the silver coin minted in the Spanish colonies. The piece of 8 was so ubiquitous and trusted that it remained the official currency in the United States until the Coinage Act of 1857. Its appeal to pirates was twofold: intrinsic value and portability/anonymity. Since its value was tied directly to the verifiable silver content, it was insulated from the political and financial machinations of any single European power. It was in a very real sense, fiat-proof. Furthermore, once a Spanish dollar was spent in a pirate haven like Nassau, its source was virtually untraceable. The transaction was a physical transfer, leaving no audit trail or record for the authorities to follow. This ability to execute a final, auditable transfer of value outside the state-controlled banking system is the ultimate goal of any shadow market currency. This brings us to the modern era and the role of cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin and Monero in the dark economy. Bitcoin is often compared to digital gold. While it lacks the intrinsic value of silver, its utility is derived from its decentralization and fixed supply. Like the piece of 8, Bitcoin is valuable precisely because no single government or central bank can unilaterally inflate its supply or arbitrarily seize it, provided the holder controls their private keys. It functions as a bearer instrument. Possession is proof of ownership, just like the physical silver coin. However, the major drawback of Bitcoin, from a secrecy standpoint, is its pseudonymity. The entire transaction history, the ledger, is public and permanent. While the names of the individuals are not recorded, sophisticated blockchain analysis can, and often does, link transaction patterns to real-world identities, making it far less private than the physical transfer of silver. This is why we see the emergence and use of privacy coins, such as Monero XMR, within the deep recesses of the shadow economy. Monero utilizes techniques like ring signatures and stealth addresses to obscure the sender, receiver, and amount of transaction, making the blockchain truly opaque rather than merely pseudonymous. Monero is, arguably, the true digital successor to the pirate piece of 8, a currency designed to operate with complete finality and total anonymity outside the purview of the state, restoring the high degree of financial secrecy the pirates enjoyed. The comparison extends to the function of the currency. The piece of 8 was a payment for everything the pirate community needed to function: provisions, weapons, ship repairs, and crucially, the fencing of valuable goods. This created a self-contained circular economy within the pirate havens. Similarly, cryptocurrencies serve as the sole method of payment for goods and services on darknet markets, from illicit substances and counterfeit documents to hacking services. The currency is not just a store of value. It is the grease that facilitates the illegal trade and creates a parallel, functional economy that sustains a community of participants. In both instances, the currency selection signals a rejection of state authority over the issuance and movement of money. Pirates did not trust the debased currencies of the English or French monarchies. Shadow markets do not trust the centralized, surveilled fiat currencies of modern nation-states. They both chose a currency defined by its resistance to manipulation and its guarantee of finality and privacy. The medium changes from silver to code, but the philosophical intent remains the same: an independent, sovereign form of value transfer. The true genius of the pirate economy was not just in taking wealth, but in how it managed risk and redistributed capital internally, a self-funded, collective insurance mechanism that mirrored the decentralized incentives we see in modern digital security and asset protection. We previously discussed the wounds and injury schedule, the contractual, predefined compensation for physical harm. This system served a powerful dual purpose. It was both a social welfare program and a risk management incentive structure. By guaranteeing payment for injury, the crew encouraged aggressive action and high-risk behavior in battle. An individual was more likely to charge an enemy ship's deck if they knew the collective wealth of the chess party would secure their future, even if they lost a limb. It was a clear, transparent, and immediate alignment of individual risk with collective reward. This pirate model of predefined compensation for risk-taking finds a direct, albeit sanitized, analog in the modern tech world: bug bounty programs. Companies, particularly those in the cryptocurrency and decentralized finance, DeFi space, offer substantial, pre-announced financial rewards to ethical hackers who discover and report vulnerabilities, bugs, in their code. The hacker, the modern risk-taker, is financially compensated for the danger of engaging with and exposing complex digital infrastructure, protecting the collective funds of the company or DAO. The payment is defined by the severity of the bug, much like the pirate payment was defined by the severity of the wound. The system transparently aligns the financial interest of the external actor with the security of the collective treasury, paying for risk mitigation rather than risk-taking. Furthermore, the allocation of plunder in the pirate community had a highly structured flow. Once the shares were distributed according to the articles, the coin, the pieces of 8, became highly mobile capital. Pirates often spent large portions of their wealth quickly on luxury goods, gambling, and entertainment in pirate havens. This rapid, untaxed injection of capital fueled the growth of these havens, attracting merchants, fences, and suppliers who were willing to operate outside the normal customs and laws, a perfect example of how shadow capital creates its own supportive ecosystem. Contrast this with the complex, structured flow of wealth through offshore trusts and foundations. These are the most sophisticated tools for modern wealth management and, often, evasion. An offshore trust is a legal arrangement where a settler, the wealthy individual, transfers assets to a trustee, often an offshore bank or law firm, for the benefit of beneficiaries, family, etc. The genius of the trust is that it legally isolates the assets from the original owner and their jurisdiction's taxes, creditors, and laws. This legal isolation is the modern, highly formalized equivalent of the pirates' physical isolation in a remote cove. By placing their wealth in a jurisdiction with favorable asset protection laws, like the Cook Islands or Liechtenstein, the settler is creating a legal fortress around their capital. This structure is essential for high-net-worth individuals who want to ensure their wealth distribution plan is immune to the legal or political changes in their home country, just as the pirate articles guarantee the distribution immune to the king's law. The offshore trust guarantees an allocation plan immune to the settler's domestic law. Both systems are designed to ensure that the ultimate wealth distribution adheres to a private contract, the articles, or the trust deed, rather than a public, state-mandated legal framework. The transition is from a brutal, seafaring contract detailing severed limbs to a complex legal document detailing tax-exempt asset transfer, but the philosophical aim, self-determined, sovereign wealth distribution, remains precisely the same. The decision to join a pirate crew in the 17th century or to migrate wealth and operations into the modern shadow economy represent a fundamental philosophical choice, an exit from an established, perceived as unjust sovereign contract. This exit is often driven by a sense of relative deprivation and a profound dissatisfaction with the existing legal and economic order. For the common sailor, the mercantile system was a contract of exploitation. Long voyages, dangerous conditions, arbitrary discipline, and depressingly small, often delayed, wages. The pirate life offered an immediate, radical alternative: democratic election of officers, high pay through plunder, and the aforementioned social insurance. Piracy was, for many, the rational choice against the tyranny of the state-sanctioned maritime economy. This sentiment of opting out fuels the modern shadow economy. The drivers are different. No longer physical servitude, but regulatory and fiscal servitude. Businesses and wealthy individuals who utilize offshore structures often argue that the complex, high-tax, and intrusive regulatory environment of developed nations stifles innovation and unjustly appropriates their wealth. They see the sophisticated legal engineering of the offshore world as a rational defense against what they perceive as excessive state overreach, allowing them to manage their capital with greater efficiency and autonomy. The motivation is not just greed, but belief in the illegitimacy of the state's claim over their assets and transactions. The darknet markets, DNMs, exemplify this exit even more starkly. Participants in DNMs are fundamentally operating on a principle of radical liberty and privacy. They reject state control over what goods or services can be exchanged, and they reject the surveillance inherent in traditional banking and payment systems. The use of strong encryption and privacy-focused cryptocurrencies is a technological declaration of independence, establishing a zone of economic activity where the state's writ does not run. They create their own version of laissez-faire economics, arguing that any exchange agreed upon freely between two consenting anonymous parties, guaranteed by code, is inherently legitimate, regardless of commodity. In both the pirate havens and the modern shadow markets, a parallel definition of legitimacy is created. For the pirates, goods were made legitimate not by the king's seal, but by being successfully converted into pieces of 8 and spent within the pirate ecosystem. Once the loot was fenced, traded for fresh provisions, or gambled away in a tavern, it was clean capital within their economy. The act of trade itself conferred legitimacy, not the source of the goods. This is the crucial concept of fencing. the system for converting high-risk, identifiable stolen goods, like a ship's manifest or a barrel of sugar, into low-risk, fungible cash pieces of eight. Today, the modern equivalent is money laundering, which is essentially the sophisticated, globalized art of financial fencing. Through layered transactions, shell companies, and movement across multiple offshore jurisdictions, illicit funds are integrated into the global financial system, effectively cleansing their origin. Just as the pirates sought to sever the link between the stolen gold and the plundered ship, the money launderer seeks to sever the link between the dirty money and the crime that generated it. The goal is identical: to confer the veneer of legitimacy so the capital can be used freely. The methodology has simply evolved from a handful of corrupt port officials to a network of specialized accountants and global legal structures. Both systems create an economic sanctuary for wealth that is born outside the bounds of conventional law. I will continue to lecture now, focusing on the inherent instability of these parallel systems and their eventual reabsorption or collapse under pressure from sovereign states. Despite their sophisticated internal governance and robust economic mechanisms, both the historical pirate havens and modern shadow markets share a fundamental vulnerability: their reliance on an external, stable world they actively undermine, and their ultimate inability to withstand determined sovereign power. The pirates' invisible republic was never truly sustainable because its very existence depended on preying on legitimate trade. When piracy became too successful, when it threatened the flow of goods and the revenues of the great European powers, the state eventually dedicated overwhelming resources to its eradication. The collapse of the golden age of piracy was not due to internal conflict, but to a concerted, overwhelming response known as the King's Pardon and the naval crackdown. Britain and other powers offered a full pardon to any pirate who immediately surrendered, effectively splitting the pirate community and turning former brigands into privateers or informants. For those who refused, the Royal Navy, armed with superior ships and state-backed resources, executed a systematic, violent campaign against the remaining strongholds like Nassau. The state, using its absolute monopoly on organized violence, reasserted its sovereignty. The pirate economy, which relied on fluidity and surprise, simply could not stand against a well-funded, prolonged military campaign. Its law was supplanted by the king's law, enforced by the noose. We see a similar, though less bloody, pattern of fragility and reabsorption in the modern shadow economy, particularly in the realm of the darknet markets, DNMs. Markets like Silk Road and its successors flourished for years, creating sophisticated internal economies with millions in transactional volume, complete with escrow, reputation systems, and internal legal frameworks. However, their ultimate fate is nearly always the same: law enforcement infiltration and seizure. Governments and international agencies deploy specialized digital forensic teams to identify key administrators, exploit vulnerabilities in operational security, and eventually seize the physical servers and the vast cryptocurrency funds held in escrow. The collapse of a major DNM is the modern digital equivalent of the naval blockade of a pirate port. It is the overwhelming, concentrated power of the state reasserting its control over a territory, in this case, a virtual one. The vulnerability lies in the interface between the digital and the physical. A system built on pure cryptography is secure, but the administrators, servers, and networks that run are all physical, leaving a trace that state actors can follow. This shows that while the code is law within the system, the state retains the ultimate monopoly on force and territorial control outside the system. This concept of reabsorption is also evident in the offshore world. While offshore financial centers have not been physically destroyed, their extreme secrecy has been steadily eroded through global political and regulatory pressure. Initiatives like the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, FATCA, in the U.S. and the Common Reporting Standard, CRS, pushed by the OECD, have created a global network of mandatory financial information sharing. Essentially, the world's major economies collectively leverage their massive financial power to force offshore centers to choose: comply with disclosure and transparency standards, or be cut off entirely from the global financial system. Many offshore havens chose compliance, dismantling some of the deepest layers of anonymity they offered. The sovereign powers, through cooperative legislation and economic pressure, effectively forced the offshore pirate havens to become co-opted parts of the global regulatory regime, demonstrating that even a highly sophisticated, legally engineered shadow system is only sustained by the tolerance of the larger, legitimate economic powers. The state's power is not just in the canon, but in the access to the global banking network. In any system operating outside the state's enforcement power, the concept of codified, verifiable reputation is the ultimate replacement for state-backed legal assurance. Both pirate societies and modern darknet markets had to develop ingenious, self-enforced mechanisms to signal credibility and trustworthiness in an environment otherwise characterized by extreme danger and anonymity. For the pirates, this system of reputation was two-pronged: the Jolly Roger and the Code of Conduct. The Jolly Roger, the black flag featuring white symbols like the skull and crossbones or a skeleton, was not just a symbol of fear. It was a brand. Its purpose was to signal potential victims that the ship flying it was a pirate ship, not a privateer or a man of war. Crucially, a fearsome reputation often allowed the pirates to achieve their goal, taking the cargo, without firing a shot. If a merchant captain knew the ship approaching was captained by a notoriously ruthless figure like Blackbeard, they were far more likely to surrender immediately, minimizing risk and damage for both sides. The flag was a psychological weapon, a powerful advertisement of predictable, lethal consequence of resistance, a form of credible commitment to violence. Furthermore, the pirates' reputation for internal fairness was equally important. Their strict adherence to the Articles and the fair distribution of plunder made them a magnet for disaffected sailors. A pirate crew with a reputation for cheating its members would quickly see desertion and mutiny. The quartermaster acted as the living guarantor of this internal reputation, ensuring the crew's trust in the system's integrity. In the contemporary darknet market DNM, the mechanisms for establishing and maintaining trust are vastly more complex, but serve the exact same function. Since parties are completely anonymous and geographically separated, trust must be built entirely through digital proofs and market mechanisms. The most crucial element is the vendor reputation system. This is the DNM's analog to the pirates' successful adherence to the Articles. Every vendor is rated by buyers through a feedback system, often based on metrics like delivery speed, product quality, and communication. A high-ranking vendor earns the trust of the community and gains access to more profitable trade, effectively creating a powerful, self-regulating mechanism where bad actors are quickly identified and excluded, the digital equivalent of being marooned. This system of market-enforced ethics substitutes the state's commercial law. The other key trust mechanism is cryptographic assurance. Before any transaction, participants are strongly encouraged to use pretty good privacy PGP encryption. PGP keys are used to digitally sign messages, proving that the message, including product listings and delivery details, actually came from the claimed vendor. This signature serves as a vendor's digital Jolly Roger, a unique, verifiable identifier that authenticates their identity and reputation within the market. If a vendor loses control of their key or uses an unsigned message, their reputation is instantly compromised. This cryptographic identity is the essential bedrock of trust, ensuring that a buyer is dealing with a high-rated vendor they believe they are, and not an imposter. Finally, the escrow system, overseen by the market administrator, the modern quartermaster, acts as the ultimate guarantor of trust. By holding the funds until both parties confirm the transaction, the market itself takes on custodial risk, guaranteeing that the established rules of the marketplace are followed. In both eras, whether through a fearsome banner and an elected officer, or through PGP keys and 5-star vendor ratings, the shadow economy proves adept at creating verifiable, self-regulating systems of trust where the law of the state is absent. Every shadow economy requires a physical or virtual safe harbor, a jurisdiction where the community can rest, resupply, transact, and most critically, legally convert their illicit gains into clean capital with minimal interference. These geographical spaces are not merely ports. They are sovereignty vacuums, areas where the writ of the major powers is intentionally weakened or ignored. The quintessential historical example is the pirate haven, such as Nassau in the Bahamas during its peak. Nassau was not a stable, prosperous city. It was a rough, transient base that served 3 essential logistical functions for the pirate economy: resupply and repair, a place to careen ships, rest the crew, and replenish essential supplies like water, powder, and victuals; fencing hub, the central market for converting high-risk plunder, e.g. silk, sugar, navigation instruments, into low-risk, fungible currency, pieces of 8, through corrupt local merchants and agents, recruitment center, a place where disgruntled sailors from merchant or naval vessels could be easily recruited into the pirate life, reinforcing the workforce. Crucially, the haven's local authorities, whether corrupt governors or the pirates themselves, provided a shield of non-jurisdiction. As long as the pirates didn't attack local trade, they were tolerated, and the massive flow of untaxed wealth fueled the local economy. The haven, in essence, was a symbiotic parasite on the global trade network. This logistical and transactional role is mirrored today in two distinct modern phenomena: free ports and offshore data havens. Free ports, or free trade zones, are massive, often highly secure logistical hubs, such as those in Geneva, Singapore, or Luxembourg, that exist physically within a country, but are legally considered outside its customs and tax jurisdiction. Goods, often high-value items like fine art, wine, or gold, can be stored in perpetuity, bought, and sold without ever formally entering the local country's economy, thus avoiding taxes, duties, and customs scrutiny. This makes free ports the modern, legalized equivalent of the pirate fencing hub. Wealthy individuals can anonymously trade assets, utilizing the facility's legal exclusion to clean or store wealth outside the scrutiny of their home tax authorities. The key utility is the suspension of tax and customs law within a precise geographical boundary. The other parallel is the offshore data haven. These are jurisdictions or specific physical locations that offer extreme legal and technical protection for data storage, effectively functioning as a safe harbor for digital assets and encrypted communications. Examples include data centers located in neutral countries with strong privacy laws or specialized bunkers. Just as Nassau offered a physical shield from the king's ships, these data havens offer a legal and technical shield from state surveillance and subpoena. They are utilized by entities, from whistleblowers and journalists to darknet market administrators, who require absolute certainty that their digital assets and identities are physically and legally isolated from major sovereign jurisdictions. This ensures the digital flow of the shadow economy can continue without fear of immediate seizure. In both the 18th and 21st centuries, the shadow economy proves that its survival depends on securing these geopolitical and legal gaps, places where the authority of the state is either willingly withdrawn, free port/offshore jurisdictions, or systematically ignored, Nassau/darknet markets. The geography has changed from a humid, mosquito-infested island to a temperature-controlled vault or a fortified data center, but the foundational principle, the pursuit of sovereignty through geographical and legal exclusion, remains constant. The final, inescapable commonality between the pirate economy and the contemporary shadow market is the necessity of projecting and protecting their sovereignty through the calculated deployment of force, the monopoly on violence or its digital equivalent, which is crucial for survival outside the state. A pirate crew's success was not just dependent on its internal rules, but on its capacity for organized, strategic violence. The cannon and the musket were the ultimate enforcers of the chasse party against external threat, and the guarantor of the plunder's liquidity. The swift, brutal takeover of merchant vessels served two primary purposes: acquiring immediate wealth and reinforcing the fearsome reputation, as discussed in Segment 8, that minimized future resistance. This projection of force was physical, immediate, and geographically limited, creating temporary zones of pirate-enforced law where the victim immediately conceded the authority of the Jolly Roger. It was a highly efficient, though brutal, system of dispute resolution. In the modern shadow economy, the concept of monopoly on force transforms from brute, physical power into sophisticated, digital, and legal maneuvering. On the darknet markets, DNMs, the equivalent of a pirate fleet's cannonade is a sustained, professional distributed denial of service, DDoS, attack or a highly targeted zero-day exploit. These digital weapons are deployed to attack rivals, destabilize competing markets, or, more commonly, to enforce commercial terms when disputes escalate beyond the market administrator's arbitration. When a major vendor is ripped off by a supplier or a rival market threatens dominance by stealing customer bases or data, the response is often a digital siege, a deployment of coordinated computing power to crash the rival infrastructure, effectively closing the competing port. This establishes a clear hierarchy of digital power, determining who controls the virtual trade routes, just as superior naval force determined control of the Caribbean sea lanes. The force is non-physical, delivered through packets of data, But the economic destruction is absolute and immediate, serving the exact same purpose of territorial and commercial enforcement. Furthermore, in the offshore world, the projection of force shifts entirely from physical violence to legal aggression or lawfare. The ultimate defense of offshore wealth is not a ship's gun, but an army of highly specialized corporate lawyers and an arsenal of legally engineered structures. When a sovereign nation, a creditor, or an aggrieved party attempts to pierce the corporate veil of an offshore trust or seize assets, the response is a complex, protracted, and incredibly expensive legal battle fought across multiple international jurisdictions. The goal is to use the very complexity and opacity of the offshore legal environment, specifically crafted to maximize delay and expense, to make the pursuit of the assets so prohibitive in time and cost that the opposing party is forced to abandon the effort. This legal defense, which leverages the intentional gaps and protections in bespoke offshore law, is the 21st century equivalent of defending the pirate haven's fortifications. It uses structure and cost to repel the attack of the sovereign. It is a defense system built of paper and legal precedent rather than stone and timber. Even the internal discipline of the pirate crew, often enforced by the quartermaster with physical punishment, has its modern analog in the digital realm. When a darknet vendor attempts an exit scam, taking customer escrow funds and disappearing, the community's retaliation is not a flogging or being marooned on a desert island, but a highly coordinated doxing attack or the permanent destruction of their digital identity and reputation, often accompanied by the immediate release of personal information to law enforcement or rival syndicates. The punishment is social and digital, utilizing the power of anonymity to expose the individual, transforming the digital haven into a virtual pillory. The mechanisms of enforcement have radically modernized, shifting from the threat of a rope to the threat of a lifetime of ruined credit and exposed identity. But the core need to enforce the private law of the shadow community against internal defectors and external threats remains an unbroken chain from the deck of a brigantine to the depths of the encrypted dark web. The type of force changes, but the necessity of its monopoly to sustain the shadow economy does not. Leadership in a shadow economy is a paradox. It must be powerful enough to command loyalty and enforce rules, yet often remains highly anonymous and dependent entirely on consent or resources of the governed. Unlike a state leader who derives authority from hereditary title or constitutional law, the pirate captain and the darknet market administrator derive their power from a fragile combination of skill, reputation, and the demonstrable ability to generate profit or maintain security. The pirate captain was a meritocratic leader, elected for his skill in navigation, strategy, and audacity. However, his power was always checked by the quartermaster. This dual leadership structure created a system where military command, the captain, was divorced from legal and economic control, the quartermaster, preventing tyranny and ensuring that the spoils were distributed fairly according to the articles. This system, established through democratic election, meant the captain was powerful only as long as he was successful and fair. If he failed in battle or attempted to hoard plunder, the crew, led by the quartermaster, would vote him out, sometimes violently. Their authority was based on a continuous, performance-based mandate. In the modern cryptocurrency and darknet world, this concept of leadership takes on a digital and decentralized form. On a darknet market, DNM, the single most powerful figure is the market administrator. This individual or small team is the modern quartermaster. They rarely engage in the actual sale of goods, but they control the escrow wallet, the collective treasury, and the master encryption keys, the absolute authority over the market's code and data. Their power is immense, yet their identity is often completely protected by layers of encryption and operational security. Their authority is maintained not by a physical presence, but by the community's trust in their technical competence to secure the market against law enforcement and rival hackers, and their commitment to fairness in resolving vendor-buyer disputes. If an administrator is compromised or performs an exit scam, the entire market ecosystem collapses, underscoring the fragile, trust-based nature of their mandate. In the wider cryptocurrency space, particularly in early decentralized governance systems like some DAOs, power often accrues to what are known as whales, individuals or entities holding vast quantities of a specific cryptocurrency or governance token. These whales, often anonymous, possess disproportionate voting power over key decisions regarding the protocol's future development or treasury allocation. This is the modern, token-weighted equivalent of the captain's higher share of plunder. While the pirate captain received a higher share for his risk and skill, the crypto whale holds greater influence simply due to their capital accumulation. This structure, while technically decentralized, creates a form of plutocracy, where voting power is directly tied to wealth, mirroring the unequal but structured distribution of spoils outlined in the pirate articles, where officers receive more shares than the common sailor. In both eras, the leadership structure is inherently unstable and volatile. Pirate captains face the constant threat of mutiny. DNM administrators face the constant threat of doxing and law enforcement seizure. Crypto whales face the risk of market collapse or protocol failure. The common thread is that power is not absolute. It is transactional. It must be continuously reaffirmed through performance, generating successful raids for the pirates, ensuring technical security for the DNM admin, or maintaining confidence in the asset for the whale. The shadow world simply cannot afford the static, institutionally backed authority of the state. A fundamental requirement for survival in a shadow economy is the ability to shed and assume identities, flags, or jurisdictions with speed and impunity. The lack of state-backed legitimacy necessitates a kind of chameleonic anonymity to evade capture and prosecution. For the pirate, this was a matter of life and death, executed through the tactical use of false flags. A pirate ship rarely sailed under the Jolly Roger alone. When approaching a potential victim, they would commonly fly the flag of a friendly or neutral nation, such as the Spanish, French, or Dutch. Only once they were within attacking range and the victim was committed to the interaction would the false flag be lowered and the Jolly Roger raised. This tactic provided a critical advantage: concealment until the moment of irreversible commitment, allowing them to operate within the mainstream system's rules until the moment they chose to violate them. Furthermore, pirates often adopted multiple aliases or used their true names only rarely, ensuring that the legal warrants issued by the Crown were often chasing phantoms. This concept of fluid identity and jurisdictional masking is replicated with breathtaking sophistication in the modern shadow economy, primarily through the use of shell corporations and cryptocurrency tumblers/mixers. A shell corporation is the modern financial equivalent of the false flag. It is a legal entity registered in an offshore jurisdiction, like the BVI or Nevis, that conducts no genuine business operations but exists purely to hold assets or execute transactions. It provides a legal identity, a false flag of legitimacy that shields the actual owner, the beneficial owner, from scrutiny. Just as the pirate flag masks the true nature of the ship, the shell corporation masks the true source and destination of the capital. Through complex layers of ownership involving multiple shell companies across different jurisdictions, known as layering, the real individual behind the money is obscured, creating a legal labyrinth that is difficult and incredibly expensive for state authorities to unravel. The goal is identical to the pirates: to create enough distance and ambiguity between the actor and the action to evade prosecution or seizure. In the digital realm, the need for anonymity translates into the use of cryptocurrency mixing services, tumblers, or chain hopping. While cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin offer pseudonymity, the public ledger allows for transactional analysis. To clean the digital trail and achieve the untraceable finality of the physical piece of eight, users employ mixers. These services take cryptocurrency from multiple users, pull it together, and then redistribute the equivalent value back to the users via a different set of untraceable wallet addresses. This process severs a link between the original source, the dirty coins, and the output, effectively creating a clean digital slate. This is a sophisticated, automated equivalent of the pirate selling his loot to a corrupt fence in Nassau, mixing the gold with other legitimate coins until its origin is impossible to prove. Furthermore, individuals involved in darknet markets often utilize a strategy known as operational security, OPSEC, that involves creating and burning digital identities, email addresses, PGP keys, forum accounts, with a high degree of regularity. This rapid creation and dissolution of digital aliases ensures that no single point of failure can connect a long history of transactions to a single physical individual. The fluid, expendable digital identity is the modern iteration of the pirate's assumed name, designed to ensure that the individual remains a phantom to the state, operating under an economic mask until they choose the moment to cash out or disappear. In essence, The shadow economy, whether 18th century maritime or 21st century digital, is governed by the pragmatic recognition that anonymity and legal ambiguity are the most powerful defenses against a state monopoly on law enforcement. The most profound philosophical convergence between the pirate communities and modern shadow economies lies in their shared insistence on defining justice and law not by sovereign decree, but by explicit voluntary contract. The core of the pirate society was the Articles of Agreement. This document was a declaration that the king's justice, which was biased, slow, and favored the elite, was illegitimate, and that the only valid law was the one the crew had democratically and contractually agreed to. Justice was swift, often harsh, but crucially, it was predictable and transparently applied according to the written contract. The quartermaster, as the judge, was bound by the articles, not by his own whim, creating a system of contractual fidelity. This principle is resurrected in the modern digital age through the concept of code is law in the decentralized finance, DeFi, and decentralized autonomous organization, DAO, spheres. A smart contract, which governs the movement of funds and the execution of financial agreements, is the ultimate expression of contractual justice. The terms are fixed, unchangeable, and enforced automatically by the logic of the code without any human interpretation, bias, or intervention from a judge or a bank. If the code specifies that a loan is repaid on a certain date, the funds are automatically transferred, regardless of the borrower's circumstances or the jurisdiction they are in. The impartiality of the code is the modern guarantee of fairness, replacing the quartermaster's strict adherence to the written articles. Both systems create a sphere of legal operation where the rule of law is defined privately and technologically rather than publicly and politically. This rejection of public, sovereign courts extends into the highly specialized world of offshore finance and international commerce, manifesting as the widespread use of private arbitration. Instead of agreeing to settle disputes in the slow, public courts of New York or London, complex offshore contracts often stipulate that any disagreement must be settled privately in a neutral forum, such as the International Chamber of Commerce, ICC, or in a legally friendly jurisdiction like Singapore. This process is highly confidential, extremely efficient, and involves arbitrators who are subject matter experts, rather than generalist judges. Private arbitration serves the same function for high-value commerce as the articles serve for the pirate crew. It substitutes a bespoke, mutually agreed-upon system of justice for the state-mandated one. The actors in the shadow economy, whether dealing in legitimate offshore trade or digital black markets, demand a system that prioritizes speed, confidentiality, and technical expertise. They are opting out of the traditional justice system because they find its procedures too cumbersome, its transparency too dangerous, and its outcomes too unpredictable. The ultimate goal is the same: to create a sovereign legal space where their private contracts, whether they be written in ink on the high seas, in lines of digital code on a blockchain, or in dense legal clauses in an offshore trust deed, are the only recognized law. The commitment to contractual primacy over sovereign authority remains the unbroken philosophical link between the invisible republics of the sea and the algorithmic economies of the shadow web. The success of any system that seeks to challenge sovereign power is critically dependent on its ability to leverage superior, often cutting-edge, technology for operational advantage. The pirates of the Golden Age did not just rely on brute force. They were often masterful naval engineers who utilized specialized technologies to maximize their efficiency and evasion. The most successful pirate vessels were often smaller, shallower draft ships like sloops and schooners. These ships were deliberately chosen because they were faster and more maneuverable than the deep draft, heavily armed European naval frigates. Their design allowed them to rapidly outpace their pursuers and, crucially, to escape into the shallow, uncharted waters and coves of the Caribbean that were inaccessible to the larger state vessels. This technological superiority in ship design was the physical key to their operational security and their ability to sustain their evasion. Furthermore, the pirates' mastery of celestial navigation and cartography allowed them to operate in areas the state powers had yet to fully map or control, utilizing these geographical blind spots as temporary safe zones and hunting grounds. Their technology was physical, wood, sail, and compass, but its deployment created a strategic asymmetry against the state. In the contemporary shadow economy, the equivalent force multiplier is advanced cryptography and network security. If the pirate sloop was the vehicle of evasion, the Tor network is the digital vehicle of modern anonymity. The Tor network, the onion router, utilizes a layered encryption system that bounces internet traffic through thousands of relays worldwide, effectively obscuring the user's true location and identity. This technological anonymity is the core enabler for darknet markets, providing the digital equivalent of the shallow waters into which the pirate sloop could escape. Without this technology, the global, pseudonymous commerce of the dark web will be impossible to sustain against determined state surveillance. The use of strong end-to-end encryption, specifically PGP, pretty good privacy, is another technological parallel. Just as the pirate had to ensure his weapons were in prime condition, the darknet participant must ensure their communication is cryptographically secure. PGP guarantees that even if a message is intercepted by law enforcement, its contents remain completely opaque, making prosecution based on communication nearly impossible. This encryption transforms communications into digital fortresses, allowing the shadow economy to transact high-risk information with a high degree of confidence, a logistical necessity that ensures a community can organize and operate safely across global distances. Moreover, the blockchain technology itself is the single most powerful technological innovation for the shadow economy. It provides a shared, immutable, and consensus-driven ledger that verifies value transfer without requiring a trusted intermediary like a bank or a government. This technological architecture fundamentally separates money from state control, granting participants a form of digital financial sovereignty. Whether through a fast, shallow draft sloop or an impenetrable layer of mathematical encryption, the shadow economy proves time and again that its longevity is guaranteed by adopting and mastering technologies that provide strategic advantages in speed, maneuverability, and, above all, untraceable operation against the slower, more bureaucratic structures of the sovereign state. No society, even one defined by criminality, can function without an internal ethical framework that defines permissible and impermissible actions. The shadow economy, both past and present, is defined by its selective morality, a fierce commitment to internal honesty coupled with radical and self-justifying hostility toward the outside world. For the pirate, this was expressed as a strict, almost military adherence to the code of conduct outlined in the articles. Internally, pirates had a surprisingly high standard of fairness. The articles explicitly forbade cheating fellow crew members, fighting on board, except in battle, and often mandated honesty among members regarding the division of loot. Violations of this internal code were met with immediate, brutal, and transparent punishment, reinforcing the necessity of honor among thieves. The pirates' rationale was simple. Internal cohesion and trust were paramount for survival. External society was the enemy, deserving of theft and violence. This created a dual morality, virtuous conduct inside the community, predatory conduct outside it. This dualistic, selective morality is perfectly mirrored in the philosophical underpinnings of the modern shadow economy. The darknet markets often operate under a strong, stated ideology of radical libertarianism. The early administrators, like the famed Dread Pirate Roberts of Silk Road, articulated a philosophy of non-aggression and free market absolutism, arguing that any exchange between two consenting adults, regardless of commodity or service, was inherently moral and legitimate. The only sin in this view is fraud against a community member, ripping off a customer or vendor, or the violation of the community's OPSEC, operational security. Just as a pirate punished a thief, a DNM community ruthlessly punishes a scammer or an informant. The moral code is narrowly focused on market fidelity and anonymity protection. This commitment to internal honesty is enforced through the reputation system and the immediate public shaming or doxing of defectors, maintaining the trust that the underlying anonymity requires. The ethics of offshore finance take a slightly different, but equally self-justifying approach, which can be described as legal nihilism. Offshore structures are often sold on the basis that they are not inherently illegal, but rather are a sophisticated utilization of legal loopholes and international tax treaty mismatches. The morality is defined not by common good or civic duty, but by strict legal technicality. The philosophy holds that minimizing one's tax burden to the absolute legal zero is a civic right, even a fiduciary responsibility to one's wealth or family. By leveraging the legal ambiguities created by the global patchwork of tax laws, the actors in the offshore world create a self-contained moral bubble where the primary ethical consideration is adherence to the letter of the law in their chosen, non-compliant jurisdiction, regardless of the spirit of the law in their home country. This allows participants to rationalize the avoidance of billions in taxes as a perfectly ethical, aggressive tax planning strategy. In all three contexts, the pirate ship, the darknet market, and the offshore trust, the participants build a moral wall between community and the external world. They replace the state's broad, territorial moral codes with a specific, contractual ethic that prioritizes the collective economic success and security of the shadow community. The pirate sought to justify his raid against the tyranny of merchant shipping. The darknet vendor seeks to justify their trade against the tyranny of state prohibition. And the offshore client seeks to justify their tax planning against the tyranny of high taxes. The code, whether written on parchment or in PGP, dictates an internal fairness necessary for survival, while the external world remains an open target for predation or evasion. The inevitable response to the rise of a powerful shadow economy is the equally powerful, coordinated, and resource-intensive mobilization of the sovereign state's countermeasures. These efforts evolve from kinetic force to complex legislative and digital warfare, always adapting to the technology of evasion. The decline of the golden age of piracy was precipitated not just by the naval crackdown, but by a sophisticated, two-pronged political and military strategy. The king's pardon of 1718 was a masterstroke of economic warfare. It offered a legal amnesty that instantly split the pirate workforce, transforming a political problem into an individual choice. This effectively reduced the number of targets and destroyed the esprit de corps of the pirate republics. For the remaining hardliners, the Royal Navy's systematic deployment and the establishment of heavily fortified bases throughout the Caribbean applied relentless, overwhelming physical pressure. The state leveraged its superior logistics, communication, and force projection capabilities to eradicate the physical havens and choke the pirate supply lines, demonstrating that the only sustainable monopoly on violence belongs to the sovereign. Today, the sovereign response to the digital and legal shadow economies is structured similarly, relying on a combination of amnesty, legislative pressure, and targeted digital enforcement. The modern equivalent of the king's pardon is a continuous push by financial regulators for tax amnesties and voluntary disclosure programs. These programs offer reduced penalties to individuals who bring their previously undisclosed offshore funds back into the legitimate tax economy, effectively offering a pardon to reintegrate shadow capital. This strategy aims to reduce the volume of capital held outside the tax net and to gather valuable intelligence on the techniques of evasion. The systemic response to offshore finance is embodied by global legislative cooperation, the most significant being the U.S.'s Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act FATCA and the OECD's Common Reporting Standard CRS. These initiatives are the modern naval blockade. They force nearly every financial institution globally to agree to share information about their foreign account holders with the relevant tax authorities. This has functionally destroyed bank secrecy in most traditional offshore centers, transforming them from impenetrable fortresses into cooperating, if reluctant, nodes in the global financial surveillance network. The state's power here is not force of arms, but economic leverage. Comply with the reporting standard, or be blacklisted and cut off from the global banking system, which is a fate far more devastating than any physical attack. Finally, the fight against the darknet markets utilizes advanced digital forensics and global police task forces, replacing the frigate with the keyboard. Law enforcement agencies like the FBI and Europol dedicate immense resources to blockchain analysis to trace the flow of cryptocurrencies and exploit technical vulnerabilities, such as unpatched software or user errors in OPAC, to de-anonymize administrators and vendors. The state's attack is not on the code itself, which is often mathematically secure, but on the human and physical interface, the server locations, the home IP addresses, the moments of carelessness. The seizure of major DNMs like Alphabi or Hansa illustrates that the state retains the technological and legal capacity to penetrate the digital fortifications, demonstrating that even a highly sophisticated, anonymized system is ultimately vulnerable to a determined, coordinated, and technologically advanced sovereign response. The battle against the shadow economy is not static. It is a constantly escalating arms race where the technology of evasion is met with the technology of surveillance and legal compliance. Our detailed comparison, stretching from the buccaneers of Tortuga to the anonymous coders of the dark web, reveals a timeless, universal truth. When sovereign states fail to provide a system that is perceived as fair, efficient, and non-exploitative, parallel, self-governing economies will inevitably arise to fulfill that demand. The legacy of the Pirate Republic is not just a romantic tale of maritime rebellion. It is a proof of concept for decentralized governance. The success of the Articles of Agreement demonstrates that individuals, even those operating in the absence of state authority, can and will create rigorous, transparent, and enforceable contracts for resource allocation and risk management. This structural innovation, the elective leadership, the social safety net, wound schedule, and the transparent profit sharing, directly informs the modern philosophical demand for decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, and the belief that code can replace centralized trust. The contemporary shadow economy continues its legacy by creating sophisticated mechanisms to bypass what its participants perceive as the failures of the state, specifically financial opacity and fiscal overreach. The enduring utility of offshore finance and privacy-focused cryptocurrencies is a direct measure of the global dissatisfaction with state monopolies on taxation and surveillance. Every offshore trust created and every transaction moved to a privacy coin is an individual or corporate vote of no confidence in the existing centralized financial order. Looking forward, the interaction between sovereign power and shadow economies will not be resolved by simple victory or defeat, but by complex, continuous reabsorption and adaptation. The state, having successfully co-opted most offshore havens through legislative pressure, ceteris FATCA, is now focused on the ultimate frontier, digital assets and decentralized finance. The current regulatory landscape is characterized by attempts to build the digital naval blockade. Governments worldwide are now focusing on the on-ramps and off-ramps, the centralized exchanges CXs, that allow conversion between fiat currency and cryptocurrency. By regulating these interfaces, the sovereign attempts to bring the flow of shadow capital back into the surveilled system, creating mandatory Know Your Customer, KYC, requirements, and strict reporting rules that turn these exchanges into financial spies for the state. However, the shadow economy is already adapting. The next evolution is the increased utilization of true peer-to-peer, P2P, transactions and fully decentralized exchanges, DXs, that have no central point control, no physical server, and no human administrator to seize or subpoena. These systems are designed to exist entirely within the digital ether, making the state's traditional methods of physical and legal coercion ineffective. This pushes the state's countermeasure response into even more complex and ethically fraught territory, requiring constant, deep-level monitoring of network traffic and the development of quantum-level cryptographic analysis. The historical pattern suggests that while the state will never fully eradicate the shadow economy, as the demand for autonomy is too strong, it will continue to shrink its operational space, making it harder, riskier, and more expensive to operate. What remains is a profound lesson that the most effective challenge to sovereign authority is not armed revolution, but the creation of a superior, self-enforcing economic system, be it a pirate social insurance policy or an immutable smart contract that offers greater efficiency, fairness, and guaranteed autonomy to its participants. The shadow economy is thus not merely an aberration. It is a vital, self-correcting feedback mechanism that reveals the precise failures and weaknesses of centralized governance, always pushing the boundaries of technology and legal ingenuity to create a world defined by contract rather than by command. The greatest evolution between the pirate economy and the modern shadow economy is the dramatic increase in the complexity and abstraction of financial instruments. The pirate economy was brutally simple. It was based on tangible, identifiable plunder, a chest of silver, a cargo of sugar, a jewel, and its currency, the piece of 8, had intrinsic value based on its silver content. The distribution model was equally straightforward, a simple, pre-agreed formula of fractional shares. The financial engineering needed was minimal, a simple contract, the articles, and a strong back to carry the loot. Today, the shadow economy deals less in physical commodities and more in abstract legal and digital constructs. The core tool of the offshore world is the Special Purpose Vehicle, SPV, or Shell Company, which is a fictional entity created solely for the purpose of financial maneuvering. An SPV allows assets to be legally separated from their owner, serving as a legal black box that obscures the economic reality of ownership. For a pirate, ownership was determined by who controlled the physical chest. For the modern wealthy individual, ownership is determined by a complex, multi-layered chain of legal entities scattered across various jurisdictions. This level of abstraction requires an entire industry of specialized lawyers, accountants, and facilitators, a highly paid professional class that the pirate community simply did not need. This is where the cost of operating in the modern shadow economy vastly outstrips the old. The complexity itself is the cost of entry and the primary defense against state scrutiny. In the cryptocurrency sphere, the complexity is technological. The modern financial instrument is the smart contract, which is not a physical document but an automated, self-executing agreement. These contracts enable decentralized finance, DeFi, creating a parallel banking system that offers lending, borrowing, and trading without any central authority. The economic model is derived not from plunder, but from algorithmic incentives, rewards paid in native tokens to participants who provide liquidity or secure the network. This is the ultimate evolution of the pirate's transparent share system. Instead of an elected quartermaster ensuring fair distribution of physical gold, a publicly auditable algorithm ensures the fair distribution of digital rewards. However, this algorithmic complexity also introduces unique risks. The pirate's risk was a cannonball. The DeFi user's risk is a smart contract bug or a rug pull exploit. These are technical failures or scams where flaws in the code are exploited to drain the collective funds, the pool of liquidity, held within the contract. This reflects a fundamental shift in vulnerability. The pirate system was vulnerable to physical force, while the modern system is vulnerable to mathematical and technical flaws. The complexity that creates the opportunity for evasion is also the source of the system's greatest fragility, demonstrating that while the methods of financial engineering have changed drastically, the inherent risks associated with operating outside the established legal framework remain high. The shift is from a physical, tangible economy of silver and sail to an abstract, hypercomplex economy of code and legal fictions. The true power of any shadow economy lies not just in its rules or its money, but in its people, a highly specialized, globally distributed, and diverse workforce drawn together by the promise of superior economic reward and freedom from state constraint. The pirate crew of the Golden Age was arguably one of the most egalitarian and multinational workforces of its time. Ships were often crewed by English, French, Dutch, African, often formerly enslaved, and Caribbean natives, all operating under a common, non-national set of rules, the Articles. This diversity was a direct necessity. The pirate life required highly specific and diverse skills, expert navigation, gunnery, carpentry, and combat proficiency that could not be found within the narrow, nationalistic confines of a single European navy. The pirate ship was a microcosm of early, radical globalization, where merit and skill superseded race or national origin in a way the state-sanctioned world could not match. Today, the personnel of the modern shadow economy, from darknet markets to offshore finance, are similarly diverse and specialized, though geographically dispersed rather than physically confined to a ship. The modern pirate crew is composed of three primary, highly skilled groups: the coders, the lawyers, and the logistics specialists. The coders and cryptographers are the new gunners and navigators. They are the architects of the decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, the developers of the privacy coins like Monero, and the experts who maintain the operational security, opaque, of the darknet markets. Their highly specialized skill in developing and exploiting complex technical systems is the core resource that enables anonymity and trustless transactions. They build the digital ships that evade the modern financial surveillance. The international corporate and tax lawyers are the quartermasters of the offshore world. They possess the specialized, intricate knowledge of international law, tax treaties, and jurisdictional specifics necessary to construct the multi-layered shell corporations and trusts that legally shield capital. Their skill is not in building physical defenses, but in crafting impenetrable legal language that repels the attacks of sovereign tax authorities. They charge premium fees because their expertise represents the absolute defense of financial anonymity. Finally, the logistics specialists and fencers, the modern-day smugglers, counterfeiters, and darknet dropshippers handle the physical to digital and digital to physical interfaces. They manage the complex, high-risk process of converting untaxed or illicit crypto into usable fiat cash, or ensuring that a physical commodity purchased on a darknet market is delivered successfully without detection. They are the crucial link between the coded shadow and the physical world. In both the 18th and 21st centuries, the shadow economy selects for individuals who are disillusioned with the mainstream, highly skilled, and adaptable. They are united by a common willingness to operate outside conventional legal structures for superior economic opportunity. The pirate crew demonstrated the power of a fluid, multicultural, meritocratic organization. The modern shadow economy demonstrates the power of a globally networked, technologically enabled, and profession-specific workforce united by the pursuit of sovereign autonomy and exceptional financial reward. The composition has evolved from a cutlass-wielding Frenchman to a PGP-enabled software engineer, but the motivating ethos of skill-based self-governance remains the same. In synthesizing the vast gulf of centuries in technology, the core argument becomes clear. The pirate republic and the modern shadow economy are not merely analogous. They represent a constant, inevitable human impulse to create a parallel sovereign system whenever the state's centralized power is viewed as extractive, unjust, or inefficient. The Golden Age pirate was escaping the tyranny of the king's navy. The modern offshore client is escaping the tyranny of the state's tax regime. The darknet participant is escaping the tyranny of state-enforced prohibition and surveillance. The common denominator is the demand for contractual sovereignty. We have seen this principle manifested repeatedly across governance, currency, and distribution. In governance, the pirates' articles of agreement, enforced by the elected quartermaster and subject to democratic vote, serve as the ultimate check on arbitrary power. This structural innovation is directly echoed in the automated, immutable governance of the smart contract and the consensus mechanisms of decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, where human authority is replaced by the transparent logic of code. Both systems prioritize a law created by consensus over a law imposed by decree. In currency, the pirate's reliance on the piece of 8, a currency value for its intrinsic silver content and resistance to fiat manipulation, is mirrored by the modern preference for privacy coins like Monero and the decentralized, fixed supply of Bitcoin. Both currencies serve as bearer instruments, valuable precisely because they are hard to trace and outside the control of any central bank, making them the perfect lubricant for transactions that must remain opaque to the state. The medium changed from precious metal to advanced cryptography, but the function, a trustless store and transfer of value, remain the same. In distribution and risk management, the wounds and injury schedule was a pioneering form of social welfare and risk incentive. It guaranteed that those who sacrificed most for the collective would be cared for. This is reflected in the automated, predefined rewards of the bug bounty program and the legal isolation of capital within the sophisticated walls of the offshore trust. The method of protection evolved from collective physical defense to complex legal and digital engineering, yet the commitment to self-determined asset protection and transparent redistribution remains a defining characteristic. The lesson transcends technology. It teaches us that the shadow economy is not a monolithic force of pure evil, but a dynamic, highly adaptive ecosystem that arises at the precise points where the legitimate system fails to meet fundamental demands for fairness, efficiency, and privacy. Its continued existence acts as a constant, evolutionary pressure on the sovereign state. Every technological advance and innovation, from the fast pirate sloop to the anonymous Tor network, forces the state to respond with new, more sophisticated forms of surveillance and regulation. The digital naval blockade of today, comprised of global reporting standards and blockchain analysis, is merely the modern, technological iteration of the Royal Navy's campaign of pardons and crackdowns. Ultimately, the pirate was a fleeting historical figure, but the philosophical impulse he represented is eternal. As long as centralized power seeks to exert absolute control over economic activity, through taxation, regulation, or surveillance, there will always be a demand for an invisible republic, a self-governed parallel economy. The physical havens of the Caribbean have been replaced by the legal havens of the offshore world and the coded havens of the dark web. But the spirit of economic autonomy sailing under a self-made flag continues to define a fascinating, resilient, and utterly non-negotiable sector of the global economy. The study of the pirate economy and its modern digital and financial successors is ultimately a study of adaptability, resilience, and the power of human ingenuity when motivated by the pursuit of profit and freedom from oversight. What we have witnessed is an ongoing 300-year-long arms race between centralization and decentralization, between the sovereign state and the individual actor seeking autonomy. The historical analysis reveals that shadow economies are not temporary historical accidents. They are enduring, self-organizing feedback loops. When sovereign systems become too slow, too extractive, or too intrusive, the shadow steps in with a promise of speed, transparency, and a better share of the spoils. The most crucial takeaway from this deep comparison is the recognition that the modern tools of shadow finance, cryptocurrency, smart contracts, and offshore trusts are not fundamentally new ideas. They are simply technologically optimized solutions to historical problems of trust and sovereignty that pirates solved with simple contracts and a democratic vote. The transition from the quartermaster to the escrow administrator, from the pieces of 8 to the Monero wallet, and from the articles to the immutable code of the DAO, all represent an evolution towards greater impartiality and automation in enforcing private contracts. The physical world of the buccaneer was limited by logistics and geography. The digital world is limited only by code and the speed of light. This enduring parallel system forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the legitimacy of centralized authority. If individuals consistently choose to operate in a risky, often violent, and legally ambiguous parallel economy, it suggests a profound failure in the transparency, fairness, or efficiency of the mainstream system. The shadow economy, therefore, should be viewed not just as a problem to be eradicated, but as a barometer of systemic dissatisfaction. Ultimately, the goal of the sovereign state will never be to fully annihilate the shadow. It will be to make the legitimate economy so efficient, so transparent, and so fair that the cost and risk of operating outside of it become prohibitively high. Until that day, the ghost of the pirate, the champion of self-rule and contractual fidelity, will continue to haunt the edges of global commerce, sailing under the digital Jolly Roger, a testament to the fact that wherever regulation and taxation converge, ingenuity and evasion will always find a way to create an invisible, parallel republic. The decentralized dream of the buccaneers lives on, less with cannons and more with code, but with the same unwavering demand for autonomy and a better deal. This constant tension between the legal world of nations and the private world of contract also dictates the future battleground for wealth. Future shadow systems will not seek to hide assets in remote islands, but rather within nested digital architectures, layers of decentralized finance protocols, synthetic assets, and novel governance tokens that defy current jurisdictional definitions. The modern regulatory apparatus, focused on static definitions of borders and banking, is perpetually playing catch-up to a decentralized opponent that can redesign its entire operational structure in a matter of hours. The very concept of a jurisdiction is being rendered obsolete by code that executes globally and automatically. We are moving toward a world where the most valuable skill is not naval command or legal loophole exploitation, but the ability to architect systems that are legally and technically unseizable. This is the ultimate abstract defense, a system so fast and so fluid that no state can ever anchor its regulatory power against it. The pirate's legacy, therefore, is not just historical analogy. It is a design blueprint for the future of non-state commerce, confirming that the urge to self-govern, to distribute wealth by chosen contract, and to assert individual sovereignty over state control remains one of the most powerful and revolutionary forces in global economics. This enduring, complex interplay ensures that the invisible republics, whether on the sea or in the silicon, will continue to shape the contours of global finance for centuries to come. The pirate's democratic spirit, encapsulated by the quartermaster's power, also speaks to a deep human need for participatory governance in economic affairs. They understood that loyalty and efficiency were maximized when every crew member felt they had a vested stake and a voice in their economic destiny. Modern DAOs, in their attempts to mimic this participatory model through token-based voting, are not just building financial protocols. They are experimenting with the very foundations of economic and political philosophy first codified on the high seas. This enduring focus on the social contract, a contract created by the people for the people outside the state's monopoly, is the ultimate unifying theme of this entire comparison. solidify the idea that the shadow economy is a necessary, innovative, and persistent feature of the global economic landscape, constantly challenging and ultimately helping to redefine the limits of central authority. Thank you for embarking on this extensive exploration of economic sovereignty. This persistence in creating alternative structures highlights the intrinsic difficulty of imposing a single legal framework on a globally connected, highly mobile world. The globalization of finance, trade, and digital communication has dramatically amplified the pirates' historical advantage of mobility. The digital realm has eliminated physical borders, making every sovereign state's legal territory merely a suggestion to the fluid capital and encrypted communication of the shadow world. The pirates' ingenuity, fueled by the vast potential reward of autonomy, now operates on an entirely unprecedented scale, constantly pushing the boundaries of what is possible when human desire for wealth and freedom confronts the limitations of centralized power. The lecture concludes with a recognition that the shadow economy is an unbreakable mirror to the mainstream, reflecting its deficiencies and driving the ceaseless evolution of governance itself. The final conclusion, therefore, rests on the concept of regulatory arbitrage, the ability to legally and digitally exploit the differences and gaps between competing national laws. Pirates exploited jurisdictional chaos in the Caribbean. Modern actors exploit chaos between tax regimes and data protection laws. This strategic exploitation of systemic schemes underscores that the shadow economy is highly intelligent, leveraging the bureaucratic inertia of the state against its own regulatory goals. The pirate's legacy is a masterclass in exploiting complexity, a constant reminder that in the grand theater of global finance, chaos is not a lack of order, but an opportunity for those with the skill and audacity to define their own.